mentioned briefly the logistics, the infrastructure to move people around the cities, especially what I've witnessed here in terms of the development of the transportation systems here in the UAE, so things like the tram system that we've got here in Dubai and the metro systems, etc., as well as the future developments that are taking place here in the UAE and across the GCC region, such as the new train system. So key to smart cities is logistics. I've also briefly talked about communications. So the way that communications have developed from the days when I first started working, where we used things like postal services, telephone services, etc., to now a completely connected web of communications using the internet. And as I said, this webinar is testament to the way that the technologies are moving forward. The third point that I'd like to pick up on in terms of smart cities is the way that we use energy. That more and more we're designing and putting into our buildings the ability to actually reduce our carbon footprint and use the natural resources that are available to us a lot more wisely. The next point to pick up with, I think, in terms of smart cities is recreational and leisure facilities. It absolutely blew my mind when I first came to Dubai that golf courses here are floodlit, so I can go out and play golf now throughout the night. In addition, in terms of leisure, we have things like cinemas available to us, we have bowling alleys. There's a whole array of different leisure facilities available within our smart cities. What really, really will make these cities smart is the integration of all these different facilities into becoming one smart environment for us all to live and work in. However, what's key is that we must understand the total cost of ownership, ultimately, in terms of these cities, in order to ensure that they are sustainable. So the IFMA recently published an article that said that 20% of the total cost of ownership of a building, of an environment, is only attributed to the building of it. 57% of the total ownership cost is attributed to the actual ongoing running and maintenance of that. This is where industries such as ours, the facility management industry, needs to step in. So at this point, I would like to hand over to our CEO, Dr. Hayan to briefly talk to you about how the FM industry could get and should get more involved in the design of the buildings and the environment that we're actually working in, as well as to start creating the right environment to ensure that the facility management industry environment matures and grows and is fit for purpose to manage and maintain our smart cities.
Thank you, James. Thank you, Louisa. I think one of the most important points before going forward by James regarding technologies and smart FM facilities management is to keep in mind that integrating the requirements of facilities management since the early stage of the projects, starting from the concept itself of the buildings, moving forward to the design and build before joining the operations, is very, very important. So this will enable and will help reduce the efforts for operations and maintenance of the buildings and reduce the cost. As an example, when we see the sophisticated buildings we have today, whether they are towers, shopping malls, airports, hospitals, the design of the building should take in consideration the operation and maintenance of these buildings. As an example, generally while we are designing a building, the developer will consider on the commercial side, will focus on that, the place where he generates revenue. A shopping mall, for example, will be mainly the focus on the tenants area and the public areas where he can promote the building and the shopping mall. In reality, the backyard of the building is very, very important to ensure that logistics are done properly, and this impacts the efficiency of the operations of the building. Now, this takes in consideration at early stage an envisioned building information modeling that has to be studied and integrated with the life cycle of the building. This will impact the overall cost. As James said, 20% of the cost of any new projects, new building is in the phase of the concept build and concept design and build. The rest is almost into operations. 57% is going to the operation itself. And if we take this in consideration since the early stage, This will help us to reduce the cost of energy during the life cycle of the building. It's also helped to reduce the cost of assets renewal during the life cycle, and the cost of operation and maintenance, which generally include all the costs related to maintenance, to cleaning, security, landscaping, etc. So considering this at the design stage will help to reduce the overall cost of the operations. So early adoption of FM in the design can significantly reduce the life cycle cost. I pass back the communication to James, who will pursue on his presentation.
Thank you, Dr. Hayan. So let's just briefly pick up on the history of facility management. Now, certainly it's documented that when civilizations first began, facilities started to be maintained and looked after in terms of basic human needs such as fire, water, etc. But the facility management organisation, or facility management industry that we know today, only really started to evolve from around about the mid-70s. What we're seeing happening since that first glimmer of moving forward in terms of FM is really that more and more facility management has become a good integration between, first of all, the people who are actually servicing the facilities and the people that are using the facilities, people who own and manage the facilities. Secondly, integrating those with the processes that we use in order to maintain the environment and to actually use the environment, along with an integration with the workspaces that we have, the living and the leisure spaces, all brought together with good comprehensive integration of technologies. Now, when you talk to any CAFM professional, a lot of guys will start talking to you about computer-aided facility management or CAFM systems. These systems have been around and have evolved mainly from the start of really bringing computers and technology into the workplace around about the 80s. So what are CAFM systems? Well, CAFM systems do a lot of different functions and lots of different features for us. And on this slide, I actually show quite a few modules. But for example, a CAFM system will typically have a help desk functionality in it. So that is that if a business unit has got an issue, a problem related to the facility, or wants somebody to actually deliver a service for them, they may contact the help desk, which then tracks the progression of their requests through service level agreements or those kind of bits and pieces. CAFM systems typically help us to plan, conduct and carry out and deliver routine maintenance kind of activities that I'll pick up on a little bit later on. CAFM systems typically do things like space management, so help us to maximise and utilise the spaces that are available to us in a very efficient and effective kind of way. And typically a CAFM system will allow us to provide some level of cost control so that we don't go overspending in terms of maintaining those facilities. Now, I've been in this industry for 20 years, and the observations that I've made in terms of CAFM systems on how they've advanced is first of all in terms of the actual technology platform itself. So I've seen CAFM systems moving away from becoming locally installed small applications sitting on people's desktops to applications that are more web-based so that we can actually distribute and use those systems across larger, wider amounts of people. And now what we're starting to see, certainly with CAFM systems, is a move far more towards cloud-based solutions. So that is, as a CAFM customer, as a CAFM user, is that I can buy and pay for and use CAFM systems based on a click-as-you-go kind of basis, or as we would say in the industry, as software as a service. I've also seen CAFM systems develop and grow in terms of as workflow tools. So particularly when we start looking at the emergence of new mobility solutions, so things like PDAs, mobile phones, tablets that we're now putting into the hands of our technicians, of our workers, of our customers, people to actually interact with our CAFM systems in terms of getting the work that they actually need to conduct, as well as giving us feedback in terms of how they've actually conducted the work or the requirements that they may have. The final area that I've seen a lot of advancements being made with CAFM systems is the integration of these into other systems that sit around us. So here I've listed two. So we can talk about building management systems. So these are systems that are typically built into buildings at the time that we're actually building the buildings and capture a lot of data, a lot of information in terms of how the buildings, how the facilities are actually functioning. Also, what I'm starting to see a lot more, and particularly more recently, is the integration of computer-aided design or CAD systems also into CAFM, to allow the users, the operators of those CAFM systems, to actually be able to visualize and understand the information and data that they've been putting forward. But my argument at the moment, and where I personally see that there should be a big step change, is not so much in the way that we actually present and give the data, the information to the people who actually need it. But I think that what we should be looking at now is starting to look at how technology can actually change the way and drive the way that we actually conduct our business and deliver our services in a far more efficient and effective way. So I recently wrote and published an article in the Facility Management Journal out here in the Middle East. And in there I picked out two areas, and there's a lot of areas, but I picked out two areas where I see that we could go a lot further in terms of facility management technologies. So the first area I picked on was considering the differences in how we could drive forward and move away from frequency-based maintenance. So that is carrying out maintenance tasks, whether it's cleaning, whether it's M&E services, maintaining air conditioning units, whatever it may be, from a time-based basis, so that's daily, weekly, monthly, etc., and move more towards a condition-based kind of approach in the way that we maintain things. So that's actually maintaining our assets when they need to be maintained, not when it suits us. Now, one of the biggest barriers I think that we have today in order to actually achieve that is that for the providers such as ourselves in the FM industry, is that with frequency-based maintenance, it's easy for us to plan. It's easier for us to plan when we're going to deploy resources, when we're going to do tasks, etc. Similarly, it's easy for our customers or for the budget holders to start planning how they're actually going to spend money and understand what their spends are. However, what I argued in the article is that in this day and age there are far more emerging sensors, technologies out there that allows us to capture more and more of that kind of data, more and more information in terms of what are the conditions and the current conditions of the assets, etc. But what's smart and what we should do to drive this business forward in a smarter way is not so much how we capture that data, that information, to know that a lift has gone up and down 5 or 10 times or however many times, or that the bearings in a fan coil unit are getting hot. That isn't the smart part. The smart part is actually how do we use that information and that knowledge. So I discussed in the article that from that data, from that information, we can start understanding trends. We can start understanding and therefore predicting when assets are actually going to need to be maintained, etc. So that's where I see that we should move through with that. Also in terms of that, I didn't just leave it in terms of the hard services, the physical assets that we have around us. Similarly, we could take the same kind of approach in terms of soft services. So for example, cleaning. If we understood in our buildings, in our smart buildings, exactly what the footprint is, whether an area has got light usage or whether it's got heavy usage, as a facility management company, we can deploy the right resources to the right place at the right time to actually meet the needs, to actually service those areas. The second area then that I started to suggest that we could start looking at from a facility management perspective is how we actually manage our fleet of vehicles. So in ETA FM, for example, we have in excess of 600 vehicles that are moving our people, our materials, our equipment from stores, from camps, etc., to their place of work. Now, recently I went out and conducted an exercise of speaking to various different vendors out in the marketplace that provides route management software. And I was looking for two things. So first of all, I wanted to find a product that can actually help us to design the blend of fleet vehicles that we actually need to conduct our work. Second of all, having put in place that fleet, I was also looking for software and an application that on a daily basis can help us plan the routes and plan how those particular pieces of equipment or people, etc., can be moved around. And I was quite disappointed in my investigations that first of all there's very few applications that would help us to actually design the fleet of vehicles that we actually need in there. Second of all, when you start asking questions of these vendors in terms of how do they actually calculate the best, most efficient way to move people to ensure that they actually get to the right place at the right time. And you start asking questions around things like average road speeds and what road speeds they actually take into account when they do the calculations. Many of the products will just take the values or the speeds that are set for the roads in terms of the maximum speeds. Very few applications out there from a route planning point of view actually take into account the real environment, the real conditions that are out there. Interestingly also is that my observation with CAFM systems is that very few, if any of them, actually take into account the logistics of moving the people, etc., to the place of work. So they're very good, they're very strong in terms of planning, but they don't take this kind of thing into account. Other areas that we could potentially improve in terms of CAFM, etc. systems is to look at more integration, I think, in terms of other processes and systems. So, for example, people management. So, I'd be looking for a system for solutions that help us to manage our people's performance, to understand where we've got our strengths, where we've got our weaknesses. I'd be looking for a solution that also looks at the skills that we've got, but also the skill sets that we need to help us plan training programs, etc. I'd be looking at systems that help us to gauge productivity, whether it's on an individual basis or a geographic or an environmental basis, as well as people's availability. So I've seen a lot of planning systems, a lot of planning tools within CAFM systems, and I'd like to see more and more CAFM systems that allow us to plan and allocate based on our actual workers' availability, because people have holidays, people are off sick, etc. The second area I think that we could integrate far more is in terms of third-party providers and the way that we actually engage with third-party providers. So tying even those two subjects together, if we have a certain piece of work that we need to deploy people out to actually carry out in a single day, and we don't have ourselves the people to do that, it'd be great that we could go out to a few selected partners of ours to see whether or not they could actually conduct that work and do it fairly much in real time. The final area that we could potentially look at in terms of integration, I think, is maybe a little bit more in terms of the supply chain. So looking at ways that we can be clever to minimise the stocks of spare parts, consumables, etc. that we hold on the shelves, and look at moving into a far more just-in-time kind of approach to the way that we do things. Finally, and I think the biggest point at the moment, is that as an industry, what we should start doing is looking at the way that we can not just integrate the kind of tools, kind of sensors, kind of technologies that I've really talked about in terms of the things that we actually put into the buildings. I think what we could do a lot more of is actually also pulling in data, pulling out information that's available all the way around us. So, for example, the weather conditions. If we hook into a weather forecasting company, etc., we could then start managing and deploying our resources based on the weather conditions. So, for example, if it's going to rain, we might need cleaners in specific areas to actually go and clean up the mess. If, as we had a couple of weeks ago, there's a sandstorm, we may need to deploy more technicians to go and actually clean the air conditioning ducts, etc. So there's this phrase, this terminology that's starting to come quite viral at the moment that I think really encapsulate what I'm trying to say at this point, which it is the Internet of everything. Sorry, it's a bit of a mouthful. So how can we drive a change into FM technologies? So we have to recognise that there's three groups of stakeholders in here. So first of all, there's the FM technology vendors that we need to actually help deliver and develop the innovative technology solutions and bring them to us in terms of a cost-effective solution in order to move forward. But they can't do it alone. They need input, they need partnerships with companies such as ourselves, internal FM companies, specialists, etc., as being the actual users of those technologies. So we need to work with the vendors in order to develop the way forward, etc. The final group are the people who actually need to be able to create that innovative and forward-thinking environment for us, which are the customers, which are the people who actually buy the service, people who actually put the demands upon us as an industry to actually move forward. And I think that the customers can look at ways of encouraging us as an industry to actually move forward. However, there are clearly risks for all parties involved in this. This is going to involve costs. This is going to involve a huge leap of faith in terms of moving forwards, doing things slightly differently than we're doing now. But in terms of our smart cities, the payback for these, I think, is potentially absolutely great. Because if we're not, for example, maintaining our assets as we see fit to maintain them as it suits us, if we start maintaining assets, for example, when the assets demand that they need to be maintained, it means that we're not overspending by over-servicing assets, or similarly, we're not waiting until assets break before we fix them. So potentially, as I say, the payback can be great. What really excites me, the thing that's really brought me here to the Middle East to actually play a part in the facility management industry here in the Middle East, is the can-do attitude. Just sitting here in Dubai, as I said before, is that the moving forward of the environment, the technology, building the metros, building some of the new iconic buildings that are springing up all over the Middle East. It's, for me, very exciting and really demonstrates that there's a real can-do attitude out here in the Middle East. So I firmly believe that if anywhere can actually move the facility management industry forward, not just within this region but globally, it's here. And as it says at the end, we in ETA Facility Management are ready for this smart era. Thank you. Louisa.
That's great. Thank you so much, James and Dr. Hayan. I just want to open up the attendees if there's any questions out there, and I know that we have a few questions in-house and Gary's on hand as well just to ask a few questions. But if there's any questions at all, please do send us a message on the questions board and we can answer those. But in the meantime, Gary, do you have anything?
There was one person at the beginning who asked for more details on computer-aided facility management, but I think you probably covered a lot of it on the way through.
Mm-hmm.
Is everybody's experience the same, or do different FM companies operate in different ways?
I think that there's a common way that a lot of us do actually work, but at the same time, different FM companies have got different levels of maturity. So I talked about certain integrations, for example, that we're currently seeing between CAFM systems and other systems and other environments. So I think some of the more, let's say, mature FM companies certainly bring in products such as CAD systems and actually starting to use those more and more within their CAFM systems. And similarly, as I mentioned before, things like BMS and using the triggers, using the feedback that we're getting from BMS systems to actually start triggering off of them. So I think the level, as I say, the level of maturity across FM companies probably differs.
Do you think it is driven by FM companies making requests of producers? Or do you think producers have got a feel for what they do? They do the software.
Certainly most of the software producers that I've met have all got FM backgrounds, very much know and understand our industry. So I think that they themselves can be innovative, they can come up with a lot of ideas, a lot of solutions themselves, but also work with the current FM providers and the current environments to actually develop those products further.
Is there one thing that in the past 12 months you've seen you do think was revolutionary or did make a real difference in the past couple of years?
Yeah, I mean, certainly one recently that I've seen is we had a supplier coming in and talking to us about laser scanning buildings because, needless to say, traditionally there's a lack of good quality CAFM drawings of buildings that are not very well kept up to date. I'm quite excited to see that you can bring a laser, put it in the middle of the building, scan the building, and actually start building out CAD drawings based on that. The concept then that this company then went on to talk about is not just like building those drawings, but actually then interacting that, interfacing that into various different sensors that are actually around, placed around the building. So you can see that above your ceiling that there's a sense that there's a hot area, that for some reason there might be a fire or there might be a particular unit that's getting warm. but use the CAFM drawings and use the CAFM system to actually help the technician find and locate with very little trouble where that specific area is.
I see. So for the future, on this idea where you've got building information modeling from day one,
yep.
You do. This is always that question for facility management. They should be involved right at that very early stage anyway, so that you can follow through. A controversial question, perhaps. The ownership of that information. Who should own that information about the building? Do you think it's the building owner, the original developer, or a facility management company?
I think it actually should belong to the building owner. Facility management companies, I'd say come and go. That's probably a bit of a brutal way of saying it, but often enough, yeah, there's a change of facility management companies, but the actual data, the actual information owned, should actually go with and belong to and be an asset as part of that building itself.
I understand. We've got a question here from Bipin Sharma. He's asking, what remote management services do ETA FM provide for intelligent buildings in the UAE? So I assume what involvement you have at the moment with intelligent buildings in the UAE?
Well, what we're starting to develop and grow and mature at the moment is the concept of a command centre, of a control centre, where what we're starting to build more and more is an environment where we have people manning it for 24 hours, 7 days a week. And within that command centre, we have things like, for example, CCTV cameras. So one of the services that we deliver is man guarding. And again, a smarter way of working is to start using CCTV and that kind of technology, if you like, to start replacing the man guards. So we have a command centre at the moment that is certainly monitoring for some of our estate, the CCTV environment. We're starting to hook that into BMS kind of environment so that the people are there to actually pick up and understand what's going on in terms of issues, etc. And the concept of the command centre will grow and grow, I think, in time.
You said during your presentation that FM in this region had some way to go, but it was catching up fast.
Yes.
We've got one question here. Somebody asking, I assume that you would see the UAE as a leader in this region still within the GCC. How do you think the lessons learned here in the UAE could be passed on to other countries, Qatar, Saudi Arabia, Kuwait? Do you think there are lessons, and how can they be passed on?
I think there certainly are lessons. I think, for a start, I think one of the issues that we have today, and we're still seeing a trend with it, is that our customers are asking more and more of us in terms of input-based contracts. So by that, what they're actually asking for us, or what they're asking in terms of the structure of the contracts, is to say to us, look, you know, we need you to come and do, let's say, cleaning services for us. And in order to deliver those cleaning services, you must give us X number of cleaners working these hours, doing these tasks. And I think one of the lessons that we need to learn both here in the UAE and across the region is a move far more towards an output-based kind of contract. So by that, the customer should not be concerned and should not worry about the actual number of resources and the size of resources that they actually deploy, but more interested in what we actually deliver while we're there, to develop and encourage a more innovative kind of approach into the way that we're doing things. So I think that's a key lesson. We've already touched on another key lesson, which I think is to actually get the FM industry involved, not once the building's been built to come and service it, but you know, a key lesson here is to get the FM industry involved at the point of conception. So a good example for us is that we actually have a height solutions business whose role is to maintain very hard to reach external places, and I hear quite a lot from these guys that they're asked to go and clean windows, for example, in buildings that are very, very hard, very, very difficult to actually reach. And what they're saying is that if they come and, if the construction companies, the architects came and spoke to us first, we can actually help them develop ways that we can actually long-term service those environments without needing very high-cost solutions in order to do that. So I think that there's a very sort of clear lesson in that as well.
There are several questions, more than several, that have come in about cost, and I appreciate it's going to be very, very difficult for you to talk about cost because buildings vary in size, the expectation there, so I think it's probably very difficult. would it be fair to say that if people addressed a specific question to you, perhaps by email afterwards, you would do your best to address it?
Absolutely. Certainly.
So I think that's one thing. There is a question, and again, I think this is probably fair. I'll read it and we'll interpret it from there. The concept of condition-based maintenance is very important, but as I understand it, requires smart MEP equipment and BMS systems that customers may not want to invest in. I think this is always going to be the question. Who bears the cost? So you can see, and I think you put a very clear argument for the future and how it must be the way to go. Who bears the cost now? How do you pay for it?
I mean, first of all, the cost of these things are starting to come down. Particularly when we're now seeing wireless technologies, for example, it's allowing us to actually go around installing these sensors without the huge installation costs of starting to run bits of cabling and all those kind of things. So first of all, the actual cost itself is coming down. Now, I see the argument that I'm putting forward is that all three parties that I mentioned before, so that's the actual technology vendors, that's the actual FM companies themselves, that's the actual customers themselves, should bear the cost amongst all parties. So as an FM company, we should be or take the risk or be brave enough to actually start helping and investing in those kind of technologies ourselves. But the trade-off for that, obviously, is that we would also need to see some return on investment. We would need to see some sort of incentive, if you like, to actually invest in those kind of technologies. But at the end of the day, we're talking about a win-win situation here. So that if we could significantly reduce costs by 10, 15, even 20% by putting sensors in and maintaining things more on a condition basis, then why not share those cost savings across various different parties and various different stakeholders?
Good. I'll say, just looking to the questions, there are a lot that are quite specific about cost and specific about integration, which I think is probably quite difficult to answer without knowing a specific case. Yeah. However, there is one question. You mentioned the Internet of Everything and that idea that you can use the cloud. Somebody's asking about the security of the cloud. Is CAFM a secure system? Is it secure enough to run it as a cloud-based system?
Well, with technologies for security these days, companies, large companies such as Microsoft, for example, that are working towards cloud-based, Google, and all the other ones that we could no doubt mention, certainly take security very seriously. So there is a huge amount of investment in technology, but in terms of also the security there as well. Security is always going to be a discussion and always a concern. And again, it's part of being brave and moving forward, but we've got to kind of overcome these concerns that we've got and trust in the technology providers that we have in order to deliver its technical solutions. Now, I interestingly saw a film a couple of days ago called Fast and Furious 7. Hopefully some other people have seen it. And in that film, they had a concept of what they call God's Eye. And the idea of that is that they could track anybody around the world by hooking into things like CCTV cameras, mobile phones, and all those kind of things. Absolutely amazing concept, but the reason that that is fiction and that isn't reality is that there's absolutely no way today that anybody can hook in or hack into the webcam on your mobile phone, for example, or the CCTV cameras that we've got around us. So I understand it's a concern, I understand it's a worry, and it will take a long time to, certainly, if ever, to end up in the God's Eye kind of approach. But I think that security is certainly fairly strong out there, or not fairly strong, is very strong out there in the technologies that we have from a cloud-based perspective.
And I assume in the fullness of time that information on the way a building works and the way heating works, that sort of information, it could be worth sharing because you could learn from that, other people would learn, and people could move forward as well.
Absolutely. If we understand the performance characteristics of a fan hall unit in an air-conditioned environment, etc., and understand how it performs under certain different conditions in certain different types of buildings, it'll help us quickly as a business, as an industry, start to understand the trends of when these things are likely to fail. So absolutely, I also think that there is potential here to actually share the data, to share the trending information.
To the benefit of everybody in the time. That's really good. Again, there's many questions here on cost. I'd say to people listening, I think if you've got specific questions about specific specific cases, if you email, I don't know, email Louise.
Yeah, everyone should have my email address. So just send them over, and then I can we can get that to you.
I'm going to pass it on to James. I think it could be a very busy afternoon for him, but I think that may be a better way to deal with some of those things.
And we can maybe, once we collect all the questions, then perhaps we can do another webinar afterwards to actually kind of go through these questions in more detail, just find out, what you're really looking for answers from, and cover those in another webinar as well coming up.
Which we can do quite simply, can't we?
Yes,
yeah, convenient time for everybody. That's a really good idea. Excellent. Okay, is there anything else? Just looking through this, like I say, cost seems to be very important. I'll just read this question and see how you respond to this. There's a lot of software solutions that can be adapted for CAFM. Can you suggest which solution is based to be used to implement this CAFM?
A very difficult one, I think, actually, to answer without knowing the specific environment that the questioner is actually working within.
Some people, or a person here, suggesting the building owners are not bothered. I assume this goes back to that idea of where the cost is borne. Do you think building owners aren't bothered? I think building owners probably are bothered about the cost. And
I think they get more and more bothered.
Yes.
I think part of what's interesting here in Dubai is that obviously when Dubai started to take off back in the early 70s, buildings were built very rapidly, etc. But the actual lifespan of these buildings were fairly small. So what we're seeing is a lot of buildings now being rebuilt with the owners having learnt that lesson and actually investing more and more in terms of looking at the way that those buildings are maintained to protect the assets that they've actually invested in.
So one assumes it's the idea that building owners now recognise,
I think so,
life cost of the building, sustainability, plus what their tenants or the owners of the apartments will expect from businesses through to homeowners.
Absolutely. I think building owners are demanding now for more information. So most of the biggest clients we have, they are asking for regular reportings, including now online reporting. They are asking for building owners if they are getting better value, service quality coming from our services, and also getting the lower cost. Because don't forget that all these information systems used currently, they improve the reporting, the information, the control of the processes. And at the same time, they help to reduce the cost by getting more productivity. So if building owners see that, they will be bothered and they will be interested. So we go back with transparency, and we owe to the clients. We owe them transparency and provide them the information.
And that has been one of the changes in this region in the past 10 years. That attitude to the buildings, the idea they build it 20 years, knock it down, build something else. That really does seem to have gone away now. Not just from a cost point of view, but people recognise that they need to be seen to be doing the right thing.
I think what's interesting when we look to what's happening now in terms of smart FM, we're speaking about smart cities, smart roads. This morning I was reading in the newspaper smart communication and road for the new metro for EXPO 2020. Everybody's speaking smart. I go back to the FM industry, where I've been working here in this industry since more than 25 years, first in Europe and then in UAE. I have seen the evolution of the information supporting system and the planning. So initially we have seen systems where people were planning on Excel sheets just to plan the preventive maintenance. They moved later on to the CMMS, the Computer Maintenance Management Systems. Then actually everybody is speaking about CAFM system. I think we are starting now a new era in terms of information systems for facilities management industry. CAFM is not the only solution. People speak about CAFM now. In a few years, I have seen some of the questions on the screen about geographic information system, GIS systems. What's important to say that information is sitting everywhere. It's sitting in DMS system, it's sitting in the GIS system, tracking the vehicles. James spoke about the logistics, people transport, goods transport, CCTV systems. So there are information, everything now is digital. And informations are sitting in different applications. The challenge now, and this is the new era, is how we integrate all this information, bring this information together, being able as managers to analyze this information, take decisions, and provide value for the client. And that's really a new era in terms of information systems for facilities management industry.
And that seems to be the audience you've got. They are asking these specific questions, but the challenge for you guys is actually to bring it all together. So you can talk about this specific part, that specific part, but find a way for it all to work.
And we are investing a lot in this, and we know that the value for the future for our clients is to invest in this information system to be more smarter.
Okay. If you had one lasting thought to leave with people today, and as I said, certainly you will answer individual questions where you can, and we'll look for next webinar. What advice would you give people listening? Where should they be looking for the next 12 months and say the next 10 years?
Well, I think overall for people, particularly in our industry, don't just accept how things work today. Don't just take, the way that we've traditionally, historically done things. We always need to keep pushing forward the barriers. We always need to keep looking at the next big thing. We need to start looking outside the box. So, I think what we need to do moving forward is start innovating. I think we need to develop those partnerships between the FM companies, the vendors, and the customers, etc. And start looking at ways of working smarter.
Well, I think, unless there's anything else, I think, gentlemen, I think concludes today's webinar. James Towndale, thank you very much, and Dr. Hayan Said, thank you very much.
Thank you, Gary. Thank you, Lisa.
Thank you very much. Thank you, everyone. We'll be sending out